Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, we are going to take a look at one of Lucy Maud Montgomery's lesser-known works. On this channel, we have reviewed the classic and internationally known Anne of Green Gables, the most famous of books that's been made into cartoons, animated movies, live action series, plays, anime, manga, and pretty much every other medium imaginable. And according to the finest theories of the Pareto distribution, L.M. Montgomery's other works don't get nearly as much play. There's a Hallmark miniseries of the first book of the Emily Trilogy, a few adaptations here and there, but the Emily of New Moon series doesn't get nearly as much play as her ginger sister. There is, of course, in this series, an orphan or three, the titular Emily and a few of her friends. There is a farm on Prince Edward's Island. There is romance with plentiful suitors. You'll find a lot of similar elements here to Anne of Green Gables. However, what I want to talk about today is the element that was obviously poured in directly out of a more mature and experienced Lucy Maud Montgomery's life, because the Emily trilogy is, at its heart, the timeless story of an author carving out a niche in the fiction publishing industry. Emily is one of those who is driven to write. It's not just a hobby for her, or even a learned behavior. She must describe what she sees in the world and write it down. Perhaps this is why the series never quite found the same audience as the Anne series. Every human born can connect with the feeling an alien in this world. We've all felt outcast and oppressed as we strive to find our place in the community. But perhaps not so many of us have ever stood outside under a strange sky and then rushed home, driven to capture that moment in words, driven to describe it. I have had that urge. One afternoon when I was a teenager, the clouds over my home took on the strangest effect I had ever seen. It was something like the patterning on sound-canceling paneling, something like wind ripples on a pond, how they would look from below with the setting sun shining through them at an oblique angle. Looking at them, I genuinely felt the flash described in Emily's first book. I was compelled to write down what I saw, what I felt, to capture it. And I wasn't the only one to experience this. A local photographer felt the same. This was in a day before smartphones mind. The photographer had to get an actual camera out to capture the sky, and the local paper spent the cost in colored ink to print that photo on paper. So, for me, I had a stronger connection with the heroine Emily than even Anne from this passage. There was a sudden rift in the clouds westward, and a lovely pale pinky-green lake of sky with a new moon in it. Emily stood and looked at it with clasped hands and her little black head upturned. She must go home and write down a description of it in the yellow account book, where the last thing had been Mike's biography. It would hurt her with its beauty until she wrote it down. Then she would read it to Father. She must not forget how the tips of the trees on the hill came out like fine black lace across the edge of the pinky-green sky. And then for one glorious supreme moment came the flash. Emily called it that, although she felt that the name didn't exactly describe it. It couldn't be described, not even to Father, who always seemed a little puzzled by it. Emily never spoke of it to anyone else. It had always seemed to Emily, ever since she could remember, that she was very, very near to a world of wonderful beauty. Between it and herself hung only a thin curtain. She could never draw the curtain aside, but sometimes, just for a moment, a wind fluttered it, and then it was as if she caught a glimpse of the enchanting realm beyond, only a glimpse, and heard a note of unearthly music. The moment came rarely, went swiftly, leaving her breathless with the inexpressible delight of it. She could never recall it, never summon it, never pretend it, but the wonder of it stayed with her for days. So, this is a description of the flash, of Emily experiencing the drive to write, to describe. That's the core principle running through the three books in her trilogy. And that was one of the connections that really drew me to this book. Now, then as a story, this is how the story is introduced. The story of someone driven to be an author by internal motivation. Then, as the story goes on, we follow Emily's friendships and then romances in classic Montgomery fashion. But through this, we always come back to that very specific audience for the book. Those who have dealt with publishers, editors, reviewers, and just the urge to write and through all of those years where we didn't have the capacity. Emily struggles through learning the perils of writing, of choosing the correct word, and then of formatting submissions in a day before even typewriters, let alone spell check. The horrors of getting rejection after rejection, of getting manuscripts damned with faint praise. The stress of finding that one beta reader who you respect and trust and who will absolutely harrow your soul with just and truthful analysis of your story. And then we get to what I consider to be one of the most memorable parts of Lucy Maud Montgomery's work for any author. This is what I consider the fun part, the part where Montgomery pours all of her many frustrations over the wild and contradictory reviews in the final book of the Emily series. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from Emily's Quest, Chapter 22, Part 2, and this is for all of you authors who have ever had the guts to actually send in paper, get it rejected, send it in, and then have the reviews finally come out. I had hoped to learn something from the reviews, but they are all too contradictory, said Emily. What one reviewer pronounces the book's greatest merit, another condemns as its worst fault. Listen to these. Miss Starr never succeeds in making her characters convincing, and one fancies that some of the author's characters must have been copied from real life. They are so absolutely true to nature that they could hardly be the work of imagination. I told you people would recognize old Douglas Corsi, interjected Aunt Elizabeth. A very tiresome book, a very delightful book, a very undistinguished fiction, and on every page the work of the finished artist is apparent. A book of cheap and weak romanticism, and a classic quality in the book. A unique story of a rare order of literary workmanship. And a silly, worthless, colorless, and desultory story. An ephemeral sort of affair, and a book destined to live. What is one to believe? I would just believe only the favorable one, said Aunt Laura. Emily sighed. My tendency is just the other way. I can't help believing the unfavorable ones are true and that the favorable ones were written by morons. But I don't really mind much what they say about the book. It's only when they criticize my heroine that I'm hurt and furious. I saw red over these reviews of Darling Peggy, a girl of extraordinary stupidity. The heroine has too marked a self-consciousness of her mission. I did think she was a bit of a flirt, conceded Cousin Jimmy. A thin, Swedish heroine. The heroine is something of a bore. Queer, but altogether too queer. I told you she shouldn't have green eyes, groaned Cousin Jimmy. A heroine should always have blue eyes. Oh, but listen to this, cried Emily gaily. Peg Applegate is simply irresistible. Peg is a remarkably vivid personality, a fascinating heroine. Peg is too delightful not to be credited while we were under her spell. One of the immortal girls of literature. What about her green eyes now, Cousin Jimmy? Cousin Jimmy shook his head. He was not convinced. Here's a review for you, twinkled Emily. A psychological problem with roots that stretch far into subliminal depths, which would give the book weight and volume if it were grappled with sincerely. I know the meaning of all of those worlds by themselves except two, but put together they don't make any sense, protested Cousin Jimmy ruefully. Beneath the elusiveness and atmospheric charm is a wonderful firmness of character delineation. I don't quite get that either, confessed Cousin Jimmy, but it sounds kind of favorable. A conventional and commonplace book. What does conventional mean? Asked Aunt Elizabeth, who would not have imposed by transubstitution or Gnosticism. Beautifully written and full of sparkling humor, Miss Starr is a real artist in literature. Oh, now, there's a reviewer with some sense, purred Cousin Jimmy. The general impression left by this book is that it might be much worse. That reviewer is trying to be smart, I suppose, said Aunt Elizabeth, apparently quite oblivious of the fact that she'd said the very same thing herself. The book lacks spontaneity. It is saccharine and melodramatic, mawkish and naive. I know I fell into the well, said Cousin Jimmy pitifully. Is that why I can't make head nor tail out of that? Here's one you can understand, perhaps. Miss Starr must have invented the Applegate orchard as well as her green-eyed heroine. There are no orchards on Prince Edward Island. They are killed by the harsh salt winds that blow across that narrow sandy strip. Read that again, please, Emily. Emily complied. Cousin Jimmy scratched his head, then shook it. Do they let that kind run loose over there? And the chapter goes on, with Emily reading out the various reviews. This is obviously something that the authoress poured in from her own experience. And so thus did Ellen Montgomery write over 100 years ago. And I think that anyone who's done their time in the trenches of the writing industry can say that not much has changed over time. Yes, we've got spell check, we have Grammarly, we have word processors, and we're demanded to present our stories in 1.5 spaced lines times New Roman font with such and such indents instead of written in print on paper with one-sided with no ribbons. But what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Do you think that anything really has changed in the writing industry since the very first stories were published in the modern industry? Leave a comment below telling me what you think. Hit that like and subscribe button. Go check out the links below the video to get yourself a copy of my book. And pre-order Flying Sparks, Dragons, Stars, and Aliens. And peace out, my wonderful viewers. Deep within the forest, trees walk. On the mountains, boulders dance. In the skies, stars sing. And within, a human heart is breaking. Naturally, the park ranger was tremendously annoyed at all of this. Flying Sparks Volume 1, 100,000 words and another look into the McCarty family as aliens and first contact play across their lives. Available on Indiegogo for pre-order through June, and the crowdfund Indiegogo campaign will be up and running through July of 2023. Dragons! Aliens! Check out the link below the video to go get yourself a pre-order of Flying Sparks Volume 1. If you pre-order before July 1st, you will also get a free copy of Dying Embers, the original book published in 2024.